At the start of my videos, I tend to engineer some kind of semi-elaborate introduction. But for the first time, I don't think we really need one. Because today on TwinCam, we are meeting automotive royalty from the glory days of Alfa Romeo. We're privileged to stand at the dawn of their longest running model with a Series 1 boat tail Duetto Spider 1600. Before we get into it, this car is to be auctioned by Manor Park Classics. So if you'd like to get your hands on, well, one of the prettiest cars ever made, then please do follow the link in the description. But I feel a lot of people today view this car as the beginning of 27 years worth of folklore. But this was not the first Alfa Romeo Spider. So before we really get started, we're going to need a bit of a history lesson. Coming out of the Second World War and into the 1950s, the state-owned Alfa Romeo turned away from luxury and sports cars, making its home in what we now know as the compact premium market. With its back-to-back Formula One world titles in 1950 and 1951, their reputation and prowess continued to grow. 1954 seeing the launch of the fabulously engineered Giulietta. As the Italian economy recovered, more and more people could afford cars like these, Alfa being unable to initially keep up with demand, marking the beginning of the company's renewed glory. Off the back of the Bellina's success, they fleshed out the potential of the platform, bringing us the Pininfarina designed and built Alfa Romeo Giulietta Spider in 1955. The Giulietta was replaced by the beautifully boxy Giulia in 1962, and the same thing was about to happen again in 1966. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because the hints towards what the new Spider would look like date back a whole decade to 1956, when Pininfarina graced us with the Superflow. This prototype was based on the mechanical components of Alfa's then sports racing car, the 6C 3000cm, and it's a truly ridiculous looking thing. There's an overwhelmingly aeronautical vibe to the glasshouse and fins on the back, but the underlying profile is what we're interested in. Those enclosed inset headlamps and the strong waistline below which the body tucks in are all features we'd see 10 years later in the final Duetto Spider. Yet as early as 1961, it appears they'd essentially finished it. This is Pininfarina's Giulietta SS Spider, shown as a roadster at that year's Turin Motor Show, then as a coupe the following year. And barring a general neatening up and simplification of the features, this is the car we'd eventually meet at the same Turin Motor Show some 5 years later. At the dawn of the 1960s, Alfa Romeo were in no huge rush to replace the existing car. After all, the new Giulia was slated for launch in '62, and that was by far and away the most important car in the range, so the Spider had to wait it out. Their new small saloon was termed the 105 series, and though it was very similar to the 101 series Giulietta it replaced, it brought us to the pinnacle of the accessible Alfa Romeo. This little car is a box. To the uninitiated, if you remove the grille, this could be anything. People just don't know what they are. But beneath the skin is one of the greatest driver's cars ever built. But starting with the body, and although the 3-box shape is practical, that doesn't mean it isn't beautiful. The detailing is endlessly sophisticated. It's such a pretty little car. And the sophistication of style blends into ability too, as despite the flat front, this car's drag coefficient is 0.34, something only regularly matched by family cars in the 1980s. Under the bonnet is another component that wouldn't be out of place decades later, with Alfa Romeo's all-aluminium twin-cam engine gifting it character and power way beyond its station. From only a year into production, they gained disc brakes all round, a feature rare to find on the front axle of its contemporaries, never mind the rear, while springing is by coils all round, another rare feature to find in this decade. And with a standard 5-speed gearbox on 1600s, this unassuming saloon is an absolute thoroughbred performance car, spawning a range of coupes and roadsters, the Spider being one, that stand up as perennial favourites of enthusiasts. The following year, 1963, saw the launch of the 105 Series Coupes, a range of cars so painfully pretty, I'm not sure I can show them here without a content warning. But at long last, 1966 brought us the Spider. But if this car was the replacement for and was very similar to the Giulietta, another phenomenally pretty car, then why do we care so much? What differentiates the car we have before us from what came before? Well, by 1967, Alfa had pulled a pair of marketing blinders. The old Duetto Spider, as we've mentioned, was named after and styled very similarly to its saloon car counterpart. But the new Spider was visually cut from different cloth, so it deserved a more imaginative name. Drumming up support and awareness, Alfa Romeo opened a competition, allowing members of the public to write in and suggest names for the new car, the prize being one of these gorgeous little things. The campaign garnered over 140,000 letters and over 8,000 different names, the winner being a man named Guidobaldo Trifoni, who suggested the name Duetto. Now that should have been a lovely story, and Guidobaldo did indeed get himself a brand new car, but a confectioner's had just launched a product called Duetto, and so Alfa were forced to christen their new car simply as the Spider, hence the quotation marks in the title. 1967, however, saw the Spider grow into the consciousness of folks further afield from Turin, most notably in the United States, with Dustin Hoffman at the wheel of that iconic little Spider in The Graduate. From now on, the Spider didn't just have beauty, pedigree and engineering, but romance flowing through it. This is the kind of car that raises your heart rate just that little bit. So off the back of this, let's get to business with the style. As we've established, the Spider was both designed and built by Pininfarina near Turin, and as if it could become any sweeter than it already is, this lithesome little car was the final one overseen by old man Farina himself. Naturally, you'd be hard-pressed to see any sign of their work here. It's not as if they wrote their name across the instrument-laden, body-coloured dashboard or anything, but regardless, this is one of the most fabulously pretty cars I've ever had the privilege to observe. In profile, it's rather similar to a few of its contemporaries, most notably the Jaguar E-Type, and while that car is rightly held up as one of the pinnacles of automotive artwork, I'm here to say that I think the Alfa is prettier. Endlessly prettier even, and it's all in the detailing. You see, while the Jaguar has that feline element, the Spider heads in the direction of purity. It's cute in its pursuit of exotica, but they still share their roundedness, where the body curves away at its keel, almost hiding the traditional Alfa grille. It also has a much more purposeful stance, with a wider track relative to its body, and finally it's free of vents or creases that break up the simplicity. The Alfa is smoother and more understated. This is a sports car without the merest hint of aggression, and that makes people smile at it. But heading further into the details, and the boot lid for example, extends all the way to the tail, missing the need for an extra shut line, and on its edges are perfectly integrated little lamp clusters. It's all about cleanliness in this respect. Similarly, the front indicators are beautifully simple and the headlamps are covered, all of which were by no means standard in the mid-1960s. While the bonnet does stop short of meeting the front, it's there as a stylistic element. It follows the contours of the bow and accentuates its little smile. The Duetto is a fantastically delicate work, where excess goes to die, leaving a display of gallery-worthy, tear-worthy, and ache-inducing beauty. It would only be a cliche at this point to say I'm smitten, but I'm not going to get this opportunity again, so I'd go a step further and even say I'm seduced. But as we established with the Giulias Saloon, these things are a full house. Yes, the styling is great, but they really enamour themselves to us with what's under the bonnet. One of the greatest four-cylinder engines of all time, the Alfa Romeo twin cam. This little thing was designed by the great Giuseppe Busso, who was so good that he later did Alfa Romeo's V6, itself one of the greatest engines of all time, and it was named after him. But this little four-cylinder engine debuted in the Giulietta in 1954, carrying over to the 105s a decade later. But this little thing has more in common with a racing engine of the era than it does almost any other saloon car engine. An overhead camshaft was still exotic back then, and this little thing has two of them. But with only 8 valves to actuate, the pair of them are here to ensure the best combustion chamber design that Alfa Romeo could manage. In a single camshaft design, the spark plugs are forced to be offset, but here they can be right at the top where they're most efficient. And by angling the valves on their way in, they created a hemispherical combustion chamber with an 80-degree angle between inlet and exhaust. But beneath this combustion chamber, the spec is further padded out by a forged crankshaft and even a finned sump for better heat dissipation. But if you thought that was enough for what was Alfa Romeo's mid-level engine for 40 years, then you're deeply underestimating this company. Because what really pulls it away from its contemporaries is the construction. Not only with an aluminium cylinder head, but a full aluminium block as well, in a 4-banger from 1954. It's a masterpiece. Yet, as the years went by and other manufacturers gradually caught up, Alfa Romeo continued to keep the twin cam relevant. First with the famous twin spark technology borrowed from racing, then with supercharging and turbocharging, and then it became the first ever production engine with variable valve timing. But back down to earth, and in this car, this very windy car, so I hope you can hear me, the version of the twin cam used is the one that was developed in 1962 for the Giulia. So it's 1600cc, and it is actually ever so slightly under square, and what that means is that it's biased very gently towards torque delivery and low revs. So it's certainly not a screamer that you'd expect from something today, but compared to anything else in the 1960s, thanks to those dual overhead camshafts, this is so much fierier, fizzier. Oh, it just barks. It's such a fabulous little engine. The other thing about this car, absolutely everybody is looking at it. This very pretty little red convertible Alfa Romeo. Oh. Oh my word. What a wonderful little thing. It's just so alive. And of course, that 1600 creates 108 brake horsepower. And compared to any other saloon car engine of the time, that's just phenomenal. If we take it in comparison to, you know, an equivalent 1300, no, actually, let's say, okay, the base model one of these was 1300cc and it made 88 brake horsepower. 88. And if we compare that to, you know, another 1300cc sports car of this period, we see the likes of an MG Midget. And a 1275 Midget only makes 65 brake horsepower. Yes, that engine was detuned from 76 brake horsepower, but oh, this thing is wonderful. But yeah, that was detuned from 76 to 65. Oh, the little blips. Oh. But yeah, so that car was detuned from 76 to 65 brake horsepower for the sake of marketing, which sounds a little bit mad, but it was, trust me. But still, 76 brake horsepower even, those engines were expensive and fragile. They were nowhere near as bulletproof, essentially, as a twin-cam 1300 Alfa engine. Oh, what a special thing. Oh, it's incredible. Incredible. I think the engine rather speaks for itself. You know, you don't need my commentary to tell you how, like, incredibly punchy it is, how responsive the throttle pedal is. Oh my word. And also how tractable it is as well. I mean, this is a relatively exotic engine setup, but there's no wonder that this engine lived for so many decades, because just magical thing. You can feel that slight undersquare nature of it, because it really does like to pick up right from down low. I mean, it sounds magnificent when it's revving, but it's not necessary. You see, that's from under 2000 RPM, that's from 1700 RPM, and it's delightful. It's absolutely... Oh, there's a bridge coming up. Let's just give it a little bit of a squeeze. Oh. But yeah, where was I? This engine. Oh, I absolutely cannot say anything insightful about it. I'm just so excited driving it. It's just been stopped when hot. It's got carburetors, I'll give it that. But as will aggressively rise to the surface later, all semblance of professionalism and insight went away to die here, overtaken by my realising of a childhood dream. So here I am in voiceover land once I'd regained my composure, and that output of 110 brake horsepower and 105 pound-feet of torque was extraordinary in 1966, fuelled by a set of twin Weber DCOEs, all in a car that weighs under 1,000 kilograms, with a 5-speed gearbox to boot. The Spider, however, is clearly not geared for acceleration, encouraging you to use that wonderfully accurate, almost dash-mounted lever. It's got rather a long throw, but with such accuracy and positivity in the linkage, it's a joy. And the gearing, I'd imagine, would make it really rather refined at high speed. But the flip side of the long gearing is how operatic that engine becomes. In its long ascent through the revs, the the intake noise is like nothing else. It's not an overly tuneful engine, but that case full of rasp from the carburetors stinks of exotica, as does the sensitivity of the throttle pedal. Much like the Alfa Sud I drove a couple of years ago, it's a car you drive with your big toe, coaxing out its baritone presence. Viewers, this is not a competitor for your MGBs and the like. The Duetto Spider is a gentle thoroughbred. And that slight juxtaposition continues through to the suspension, which is double wishbones and coil springs at the front. Now, I've said across many videos that this is fundamentally the best setup for a road car, and it is. But in the mid-1960s it was much more common than it is today, so don't read too much into it, but clearly Alfa Romeo weren't skimping. At the back, however, while located by coil springs and transverse arms, is a live axle. Now again, a live axle was the accepted way of doing rear suspension at the time, but while the springing brings a dose of modernity, it doesn't scream thoroughbred in quite the same way. But remember that many of the cars we hold dear, rear drive Escorts and Cortinas for example, have a simple live axle keeping the rear from dragging along the floor. So by engineering these systems with a level of precision, they can be made to dance. But to the platform, and although it is quite modern to have coil springs, it's not so modern to have a live axle. And it's also not very modern to have a steering box rather than a steering rack. But you know what, it doesn't feel like some antique. The steering is really quite delicate. It's not absolutely razor sharp, but you want to treat it really delicately. Of course, no power steering, and you get this big rim to compensate for it. But yeah, you just tiptoe the car everywhere. It's like you're dancing with it. This little Duetto is nowhere near the most capable car I've ever driven. What it is, however, by a long way, is the most stylish car I've ever driven, and it's certainly among the most entertaining. As I said in the E30 video only last week, to boil driving down to spec sheets and lap times is to hand your enthusiast card in. As a driving experience, delivering gentle weight, feedback, connection, crispness and sonority, it's the holy grail. I walked away from this little car last week and made it my phone's wallpaper. This is the kind of car that breeds enthusiasm, and long may we enjoy them. But of course, the Duetto is a rare car, and while they built them for 27 years, Series 1 1600s do not grow on trees. Alfa Romeo apparently built around 6,300 examples, and how many of those were right-hand drive, I daren't guess. And if you were in Britain considering one of these, then you had to pay nearly £1,900. For context, a Honda S800 or an MGB were only around the £800 mark, over £1,000 less, putting this in the company of some serious machines. Working our way up, a fuel-injected Triumph TR5 was only £1,270, followed by a Fiat 124 Coupe at around 1,300 quid. For the majesty of a Lancia Fulvia HF Coupe, you had to pay £1,550, with a Lotus Lan and the 8-cylinder Sunbeam Tiger sitting between. But then we can work our way up to a 4.2 litre Jaguar E-Type, less than £100 more than our little Alfa. Now this, above anything else, is indicative of the powers of protectionism, but barring the British cars I've mentioned, the Fiat being 30% cheaper than the Spider proves what was engineered into this fabulous car. But of course, the Spider stuck around for 27 years until 1993, making it the longest produced Alfa Romeo model. That not only means it was the final surviving member of the 105 series, but that it was also the last rear-drive Alfa until the 8C came along in 2007. Now, none of us doubt whether this was a great car, but I'm afraid its brilliance was not why it lived for so long. Certainly, its popularity in those later years was all you could expect from such an elderly car, and its brilliance is probably why Alfa Romeo weren't ashamed of selling it, but there was no replacement because they couldn't afford it. We've just spent however long waxing on about how fabulous all the 105s were, but it counted for little in the end. Though Alfa Romeo showed flashes of engineering brilliance in the decades after, its styling fell off a monumental cliff, and with perception of reliability pushing people away, there was little emotional pull to an Alfa in the 1980s. It was only when Fiat took over in 1986 that things started to improve again, and the first component in the late 90s Alfa Renaissance was the all-new Alfa Romeo Spider. After this generation was over and Alfa slumped further, a 2010s renaissance was teased through the launch of a rear-drive four-door saloon that was christened Giulia. I can't quite tell you what I'm aiming for here, but taken in general, the 105 series Alfa Romeos were so well regarded and remain so loved today that two examples of an Alfa Romeo Renaissance were kicked off by a tribute to this era of car. Taken in general, Alfa Romeo are a bit of an enigma. While they have this phenomenally rich history of racing victories, engineering advances, absolute artworks and truly driver-focused machines, there are so many caveats and missteps along the way that while everybody postures to love Alfa Romeo, I feel not that many people truly appreciate how, in their glory days, they were producing all of the above that was unmatched by almost anyone else. There's no wonder that with their rarity and their reputation that cars like this are worth as much as they are, which is a shame for people like me, but maybe someday, who knows. But with that, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description, and I'll have more videos coming along soon.